Is America an extroverted or introverted country? What do you think? In this video, I will be exploring my experience on that. I will also be discussing 5 social norms that I had to adapt to when I moved to the United States. So if you're curious about that, be sure to keep watching. Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of Diaspora Honey and Beestings. My name is Lydia Atandi and I am a Kenyan that has lived in the United States for 10 years. In this channel, I share with you what that journey has been like. If you're tuning in for the first time, we are so glad you're here. Welcome to the family. And if you are a regular viewer, I really appreciate you. You're awesome. Thank you so much for your tremendous support. And whether you're here for the first time or for the 10th time, be sure you are subscribed so we can keep these conversations going, okay? So today, guys, I will let you in on 5 unspoken social norms I had to adjust to when I moved abroad. No amount of movies that I watched in Kenya prepared me for some of them. So buckle up and we're gonna dive right in. So the first thing I had to adapt to when I moved abroad was the high regard for personal space. A good example is this. When you are lining up at the supermarket or the bank or anywhere that you need to queue in the US, you will notice that people will automatically leave a substantial amount of space between them and the next person. And sometimes this space is an arm's length. Yeah, it could be anywhere from an arm's length to a very small space, but usually it's a substantial space. In Kenya, generally people don't leave much space between each other in queues because physical closeness is not something that many Kenyans find uncomfortable. I will also share an anecdote that proves this point. One day, 10 years ago, I walked into a local church here in Kansas and I sat right next to 2 ladies because why not, right? With time, I grew close to those 2 girls. One time after we had gotten really comfortable with each other, one of them mentioned that she was really fascinated by the fact that the first day we met, I literally sat next to them. I asked her, what was so fascinating about that? And she said that most people would have probably left a seat in between them and the 2 ladies because they didn't know each other. When she said that, I started noticing that in American churches or gatherings, people generally sit right next to each other if they are family or if they know each other really well. The exception to this would be when the room is full. In that case, people would have no option but to sit close to the people that they are not familiar with. But even then, the high regard for personal space will be tangible, right? Another social norm I had to adapt to when I moved abroad was the individualistic nature of life. According to a number of cross-cultural studies done, America is one of the countries that score highly on the individualism index. What is an individualistic society anyway? You may wonder. Well, simply put, it is one whereby personal reliance and independence are highly valued. In such cultures, the idea of I need to take care of myself is embraced more than we need to take care of each other. Such societies also tend to value privacy, personal space, and freedom of expression. In individualized societies, social support is more institution-based than anything else. For example, in the US, the elderly are commonly taken care of at nursing homes, whereas in Kenya, they are usually taken care of by family members. In the US, another example is this. In the US, when a person passes on, the financial burden of the loss is covered largely by the life insurance policy of the deceased person. In Kenya, a few people have life insurance, but for the most part, family members and friends get together when a loved one passes on and they pool their resources together to help cover costs when a loved one passes on. There is a beauty to having life insurance like many Americans do, but there's also a beauty to coming together like Kenyans do during loss. The good news is that you don't have to pick one, you don't have to choose one or another. Many Kenyans have decided to borrow a leaf from each culture. They have decided to borrow the planning method implemented by the Americans by having life insurance, but they also still get together during loss. That way, they get to have the best of both worlds, which I think is a great way to go about it. I personally firmly believe that everyone should have life insurance. I view it more as a need than a want or a luxury. And if you'd like to learn more about life insurance, how it works, things like that, and the different options that are out there, feel free to reach out through the email provided in the description box below. I'll be glad to help you with your questions. And in case I don't have an answer to your question, I'll be happy to point you towards the right direction where you can get your questions answered. Another thing I had to adapt to when I moved to the US is the extroverted nature of the society. I know we said the US is an individualized society, but does that mean it's also an introverted one? Absolutely not. And before I share with you why I believe the US is largely an extroverted society, let's go ahead and define that. What is an extroverted society? An extroverted society is a culture where people generally value outgoing behavior, social interaction, group activities, and visible expression of thoughts and emotions. In this kind of society, being talkative, sociable, energetic, and publicly engaged is often seen as the preferred way to be. That sounds a lot like the US, in my opinion. Let's see how this plays out in different aspects of life in America. Let's talk about workplaces, for example. In corporate America, extroversion is often treated like a requirement for success. The people who speak up in meetings, people who network constantly and show big personalities are seen as confident, and they're seen as better candidates for leadership positions. Meanwhile, quiet workers who do excellent work may get overlooked simply because they're not loud or visible enough. The corporate environment often rewards being outgoing more than being thoughtful and insightful. So introverts sometimes feel pressure to act extroverted just to be taken seriously. And this is how this point applies directly to me. So I work in healthcare. You can only imagine how much an introverted person has to adapt by, number one, living in America, and number two, working in an extroverted field. Over the years of working in healthcare, in the healthcare field in the US, I have become a more outgoing introvert. This is because the constant interaction with people kind of forces you to tap into your extroverted side in order to navigate the healthcare field a little more easily. Let's talk about how extroversion is rewarded in schools. So, American schools often reward students who speak up, students who participate in groups and show visible enthusiasm, and all those align with extroverted behavior. Class participation grades, presentations, and constant collaboration make being outgoing the ideal student, right? Meanwhile, quiet or reflective students may be seen as shy or disengaged even when they understand the material just as well or even better. As a result, you find that the system tends to favor extroversion over introversion. Do you still need more convincing about the fact that the US is strongly inclined toward extroversion? I don't think so. So let's move on to the next social norm that I had to adapt to when I moved abroad, and that is the Americans' love for small talk. Whew. In America, it's not uncommon to find people who just met at the elevator talking like they've been friends for years. The US is very big on small talk. People casually chat about the weather, their weekend, their pets, or random topics, even with strangers or co-workers. It's seen as a normal way to show friendliness and to build connection. In fact, not engaging in small talk can sometimes be seen as rude or distant. Coming from Kenya, where conversations tend to be more purposeful, I had to adapt to this cultural difference. And don't get me wrong, Kenyans also engage in small talk and chit chat, but not half as much as the Americans do. At first, it felt shallow and unnecessary to constantly make light conversation, but over time, I learned that in the American culture, small talk is not meaningless. It's a social skill and a gateway to deeper relationships. Another fact tied to that, and which I also had to adapt to when I moved abroad, is the fact that many American people like to share details of their personal lives. Many Americans often openly share details about personal lives, just things like relationships, therapy, finances, boundaries, or even childhood trauma. For them, this level of openness feels normal, and it's seen as a way to connect or build trust. But coming from Kenya, where people are more private and personal, such matters are only shared with very close friends or family. So this was a shocker to me. I had to adjust to the idea that in the US, sharing personal details isn't considered too much. Rather, it's often seen as being honest and relatable. So last but not least, one other thing I had to get used to when I moved to the US was people's direct nature of communication. This was major for me. The American people tend to be very direct in their communication. They say what they mean, they ask for what they want, and they share their opinions openly, even in professional settings. This straightforward style is seen as honest and efficient. However, coming from Kenya, where communication is often more indirect, polite, and careful to avoid offending others, this took some getting used to. At first, I thought directness sounded rude and harsh, but I eventually realized that in the American culture, being direct is not disrespectful. It's considered clear, confident, and respectful of everyone's time. So there was a time 5 years ago when I got a voicemail from work that was like, "Hi Lydia, I was just calling to let you know that we don't need you today, okay? Thank you, bye." I was so shocked, and I remember thinking, how rude. But with time, I learned that that was something that was commonly said to healthcare workers if there was more staff scheduled for the day than was needed. And if some staff members needed not to come in for the day, that's what they say: "We don't need you today." And that was a very normal thing to say. Having mentioned that point on directness, I will also mention that there's a bit of a twist to it. Americans are often known for being direct, but I've also noticed that their directness can be selective. So sometimes they will smile, nod, and seem to agree with you during a conversation, only for you to find out later that they actually felt differently. This can be quite confusing. In the US, people sometimes avoid open disagreement to keep the interaction positive or polite, even if they don't truly agree. So while Americans value honesty, they also value avoiding conflict, this leads to kind of a mix of directness and indirectness in conversation. Some people call this being fake. My take on it is that it's hard to know people's thoughts or intentions. However, sometimes I wish people would be more authentic and tell you what they truly think, as opposed to, flashing a big smile and nodding their head vigorously to what you're saying, only for you to find out that, they turned around and criticized every single thing you said, and you're like, really? Another thing I learned to normalize is the fact that in workplaces, some people will greet you, they'll say hi when they get to work, but some of them will not. I learned not to take it personally. One thing though that I've got to give credit for though is people's willingness to help. America is a very solution-oriented society, and people are generally big on offering to help if they see you struggling with something. So that's a good thing. That's a positive thing I gotta give credit for. So in conclusion, adapting to American communication and social norms has been a journey, from navigating small talk and personal openness to understanding when people are being truly direct versus politely indirect. Every culture has its own rhythm of connection, and moving to a new country forces you to unlearn and relearn how people interact. What about you? What shocked you the most when you moved to the United States, or when you moved to any other country that you might have moved to? For me, the biggest shock was how direct Americans can be in the way they speak. At first, it felt intense, but over time, I got used to it. So there you have it for today's episode. I really appreciate you hanging out with me today. If you have not subscribed, I'm going to remind you that subscribing is free. And when you do so, it helps ensure that we keep in touch through these conversations and through these episodes. For now, though, I've got to say goodbye. Stay blessed, and I will see you on the next episode.